Captain Jake Sullivan stood on the bridge of the Liberty's Edge, watching the stars drift past through the main viewing screen. His ship carried 50,000 human settlers to their new home on New Haven, a planet far from Earth where they could start fresh. The journey would take another 6 months, but Jake felt good about their mission. Humanity was spreading across the galaxy, one colony at a time. The communication panel buzzed with an urgent message. Jake's second-in-command, Commander Amy Davis, looked up from her station with concern on her face. "Captain, we're getting a priority transmission from Earth Command. Admiral Lisa Carter wants to speak with you immediately." Jake frowned. Earth Command rarely contacted colony ships during deep space travel unless something was very wrong. He walked to his private office behind the bridge and activated the secure communication system. Admiral Carter's face appeared on the screen, and Jake could see the worry in her eyes. "Jake, we have a serious problem," Carter said without greeting. 3 days ago, we received a message from something called the Zephyrian Empire. They're demanding that all human colonies beyond the Sol system be abandoned within 30 days, or they'll destroy every human settlement in space. Jake felt his blood turn cold. "What do we know about these Zephyrians?" "Not much, but what we know is bad. They've already proven they're serious. The colonies at Kepler 442b, Ross 128b, and Proxima Centauri C are gone, completely destroyed. No survivors." Carter's voice was steady, but Jake could hear the fear underneath. "Gone? All of them?" "Wiped out. We sent scout ships to investigate. There's nothing left but debris and radiation. Whatever weapons they used, our shields and armor couldn't stop them." Carter paused, then continued. "Jake, your ship is one of the farthest from Earth. You need to know what you're up against." Jake sat down heavily in his chair. 50,000 people depended on him to get them safely to New Haven. Now he was learning that an alien empire was destroying human settlements without warning. "What are Earth's orders?" "President Frank Martinez is meeting with the Colonial Defense Council tomorrow. General Paul Robinson thinks we should give the aliens what they want. He says we can't fight an enemy with technology that advanced." Carter looked directly at Jake through the screen. "But I think there's more to this than they're telling us." "What do you mean?" "Our intelligence people intercepted some of their communications. The Zephyrians call human expansion the spreading plague of chaos. They're not just after our territory, Jake. They're afraid of us. Afraid of something about the way humans think and act." Jake stood up and began pacing. This didn't make sense. If the Zephyrians had superior weapons and larger ships, why would they fear humans? "Admiral, with respect, that sounds like wishful thinking. If they can destroy our colony so easily, what could they possibly fear?" "I don't know yet, but Director Kate Thompson from Strategic Research is working on it. She thinks the answer might be in how we approach problems differently than other species." Carter leaned forward. "Jake, I need you to be ready for anything. If President Martinez decides to fight, your ship might be humanity's furthest outpost. If he decides to surrender, you'll need to turn around and come home." After the call ended, Jake returned to the bridge. Amy looked at him expectantly along with the other bridge officers. Jake knew he couldn't hide this from them. These people had a right to know their lives were in danger. "Attention all hands," Jake said into the ship's communication system. "This is the captain. Please report to your assigned emergency stations. I have important information to share with everyone." Within minutes, every screen throughout the ship showed Jake's face. 50,000 people stopped what they were doing to listen. Jake took a deep breath and began explaining about the Zephyrian ultimatum and the destroyed colonies. The reaction was immediate. Some people cried, others got angry. Many asked questions that Jake couldn't answer. But what impressed him most was that nobody panicked. The humans on his ship faced the news with the same determination that had brought them this far from Earth. Dr. Ryan Mitchell, the ship's head of research, requested a private meeting with Jake after the announcement. Mitchell was a small, quiet man who spent most of his time working on new technologies in the ship's laboratories. "Captain, I've been thinking about what you told us," Mitchell said. "If these Zephyrians are afraid of human chaos, maybe that's our advantage." "What do you mean?" Most alien species we've encountered think in very organized, predictable ways. They have rigid social structures and follow established patterns. But humans are different. We adapt quickly. We change our plans when something isn't working. We try new approaches that other species might never consider. Jake nodded slowly. You think that's what scares them? Maybe. If they're used to enemies who fight in predictable ways, they might not know how to handle humans who don't follow the rules. Mitchell paused. Captain, I've been working on some new weapon designs. Nothing that could match their firepower, but systems that work in unexpected ways. If we do end up fighting, we might need to be very, very unpredictable. 3 days later, Jake received another message from Earth. President Martinez had made his decision. Humanity would not abandon its colonies. Instead, they would prepare for war against the Zephyrian Empire. But this wouldn't be the kind of war anyone expected. Admiral Carter explained that Earth Command was developing a new strategy. Based on deception and psychological warfare, humanity couldn't win a direct fight, so they would fight an indirect one. Jake, I need you to continue to New Haven, Carter said. But you're not just delivering colonists anymore. You're establishing humanity's furthest base of operations. If our plan works, that colony might become very important. Jake looked out at the stars again. Somewhere out there, an alien empire was preparing to destroy humanity. But humans had faced impossible odds before and found ways to survive. This time would be no different. He turned to Amy. Set course for New Haven, maximum speed. Yes, sir, Captain. Do you really think we can win against them? Jake smiled grimly. Amy, they made one big mistake. They gave us 30 days to prepare. That's 30 days for humans to be creative, adaptive, and completely unpredictable. They have no idea what they're up against. As the Liberty's Edge jumped to faster-than-light speed, Jake felt something he hadn't expected. Despite the overwhelming odds, despite the destroyed colonies, despite facing an enemy with superior technology, he felt hope. The Zephyrians wanted humanity to follow their rules and surrender quietly, but humans had never been good at following rules. 6 months had passed since humanity's supposed surrender to the Zephyrian Empire. Captain Ben Hayes guided his small diplomatic ship through the outer edge of Zephyrian space, heading toward their homeworld of Valix Prime. His vessel looked harmless enough. Just another human ship carrying officials who wanted to discuss peace terms. But appearances could be deceiving. Ambassador Nicole Foster sat in the passenger compartment, reviewing her notes one final time. She wore simple diplomatic clothing and carried documents that showed humanity's complete surrender to Zephyrian demands. To anyone watching, she was exactly what she appeared to be, a human diplomat seeking to formalize their species' submission. Truth was much more complicated. Ambassador, we're receiving a transmission from Valix Prime, Hayes called from the pilot's seat. They're giving us clearance to land in the capital city. Nicole nodded. Good. Remember, Ben, we're beaten and humble. We're here to beg for mercy and offer tribute. Play your part well. Hayes smiled grimly. Don't worry. I've been practicing looking defeated for months. The ship descended through Valix Prime's atmosphere toward the massive city of Kelmaran. Nicole pressed her face to the viewing port, studying everything she could see. The Zephyrian capital was built in perfect geometric patterns with tall spires arranged in precise rows. Every building looked identical. Every street ran in straight lines. Even from space, she could see that everything was organized and predictable, just like Admiral Carter had said it would be. They landed at a designated platform where Zephyrian guards waited for them. The aliens were tall and thin, with gray skin and large black eyes. They moved in formation, each one taking exactly the same steps as the others. When they spoke, it was in unison, as if they shared a single mind. Human delegation, you will follow us to the Hall of Submission, the lead guard announced. War Prime Thekvar will receive your surrender documents. Nicole bowed her head as she had been trained. We are honored by War Prime Thekvar's attention. Humanity wishes only to serve the great Zephyrian Empire. The words tasted bitter in her mouth, but they were necessary. Everything depended on the Zephyrians believing that humans had truly given up. The Hall of Submission was a massive room with walls covered in the battle standards of conquered species. Nicole counted flags from at least 20 different worlds. The Zephyrians had been very busy building their empire. War Prime Thekvar sat on a throne made from what looked like the hull of a destroyed spaceship. He was larger than the other Zephyrians, with scars across his face that told of many battles. When he looked at Nicole, his black eyes showed nothing but contempt. "So, the Chaos Bringers finally understand their place," Thekvar said in heavily accented English. "You will present your species tribute and accept our terms for your continued existence." Nicole approached the throne and knelt, holding up a datapad containing what appeared to be Earth's complete surrender. "War Prime, humanity offers these tribute payments and formally requests permission to exist under Zephyrian protection." Thekvar took the pad and studied it. Nicole had spent weeks preparing those documents with Dr. Helen Brooks, humanity's expert on alien psychology. Every line was designed to make the Zephyrians feel superior and satisfied. "Acceptable," Thekvar finally said. "Your species will be assigned work duties throughout our empire. Some of your people show promise as servants and laborers. Over." The following days, Nicole and her small team were given tours of Zephyrian facilities. They visited military bases, industrial centers, and government offices. Their guides proudly showed off the Empire's strength and organization. Everything ran on strict schedules. Every worker knew exactly what to do and when to do it. There were no surprises, no changes to routine, no chaos. It was exactly what humanity had hoped for. What the Zephyrians didn't know was that Nicole's team weren't really diplomats at all. They were Captain Sam Turner's best intelligence operatives, trained in deep cover infiltration. Every person they met, every facility they visited, every weakness they observed was carefully recorded and transmitted back to Earth through hidden communication devices. And Nicole's team wasn't alone. Across Zephyrian space, other refugee ships were arriving at different worlds. Each carried humans who claimed to be fleeing the destruction of their colonies. The Zephyrians, feeling generous in victory, allowed these refugees to settle in their cities and work in their factories. But these weren't ordinary refugees either. Lieutenant Colonel Danny White had spent 2 years training these people in psychological warfare and long-term espionage. They knew how to blend in, how to observe without being noticed, and most importantly, how to slowly plant seeds of doubt and confusion in the minds of their hosts. The Zephyrians were so confident in their victory that they barely supervised their new human workers. They assigned them to sensitive positions in communications, transportation, and even military support roles. After all, what threat could a defeated species possibly pose? Meanwhile, back on Earth, Admiral Steve Parker oversaw the construction of humanity's new fleet. The ships being built looked smaller and weaker than before, with obvious design flaws that suggested human technology was inferior to Zephyrian weapons. Inspection teams from the Empire visited Earth regularly, and always went away satisfied that humanity had truly been broken. They never suspected that the real fleet was being built in hidden facilities throughout the outer solar system. Dr. Ryan Mitchell worked day and night developing new weapon systems, but these weren't designed to be more powerful than Zephyrian technology. Instead, they were designed to be unpredictable. Weapons that changed their behavior randomly. Ships that could alter their appearance and tactics without warning. Defense systems that worked in ways no logical military mind would expect. General Lisa Morgan spent her time developing combat doctrine based on chaos theory. Her strategies involved simultaneous attacks on unrelated targets, supply raids that served no apparent purpose, and troop movements that seemed completely random but were actually part of a larger pattern that only humans could understand. After 3 months on Valix Prime, Nicole requested a private meeting with War Prime Thekvar. She had learned everything she needed to know about Zephyrian psychology and military doctrine. Now it was time to plant the final seed of the deception. War Prime, I have received disturbing reports from some human settlements, she said with carefully practiced concern. There are rumors that some humans are not accepting our defeat gracefully. They speak of resistance and revenge. Thekvar leaned forward with interest. What kind of resistance? Small groups mostly. Pirates and raiders who refuse to accept that the war is over. They attack random targets and then disappear. Our government has tried to stop them, but Nicole shrugged helplessly. Humans have always been difficult to control completely. These groups pose no threat to the Empire, Thekvar said dismissively. Random pirate attacks are merely an annoyance. Nicole nodded respectfully. Of course, War Prime. I only mention it because these groups seem to have no clear goals or strategies. They act without reason or purpose. It troubles me because it makes humanity look chaotic and unpredictable. She left the meeting satisfied. The seed was planted. When the real attacks began, the Zephyrians would dismiss them as random piracy rather than organized warfare. They would assume that humanity's chaos was a weakness rather than a carefully planned strategy. As her ship prepared to leave Valix Prime, Nicole looked back at the perfectly organized city one last time. The Zephyrians had built an empire based on order, predictability, and control. They believed these traits made them superior to every other species in the galaxy. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The war was about to begin, and humanity was ready to show the galaxy what organized chaos could accomplish. The first attack came on a Tuesday morning, ship time. Captain Alex Johnson watched from his bridge as 3 Zephyrian supply ships moved slowly through the asteroid field near Rigel Station. His vessel, the Midnight Runner, looked like nothing more than an old cargo hauler that had seen better days. The kind of ship that desperate pirates might use for raids. Perfect. Target the middle ship, Alex told his weapons officer, Lieutenant Carol Peterson. Remember, we want this to look random and desperate, not military. The attack lasted exactly 4 minutes. Alex's ship swooped in from behind an asteroid, fired at the supply convoy with weapons that seemed to malfunction half the time, grabbed what cargo they could reach, and then fled in a direction that made no tactical sense. To any observer, it looked like a poorly planned pirate raid carried out by amateurs. But it wasn't random at all. The cargo Alex stole contained communications equipment that would be very useful to Colonel Danny White's intelligence network. The attack location was chosen to force Zephyrian patrol ships to change their routes, creating gaps in their coverage that other human teams could exploit. Even the timing was carefully planned to cause maximum confusion in the aliens' rigid scheduling system. 3 days later, another pirate attack hit a Zephyrian transport hub near Vega. This time, the attackers seemed more interested in destroying things than stealing cargo. They blew up a fuel depot, damaged several loading docks, and then vanished before security forces could respond. On Saturday, pirates attacked a Zephyrian military outpost, but instead of targeting weapons or ships, they focused on the base's food storage and medical supplies. The attack made no sense from a military perspective, but it forced the aliens to divert resources to emergency relief efforts. War Prime Thekvar studied the reports from his command center on Valix Prime. His staff officers stood at attention, waiting for orders that never came. The War Prime stared at the tactical display showing the locations of the attacks, trying to find some pattern that would explain what the pirates wanted. These attacks serve no purpose, he finally said. They target different types of facilities with no clear strategic value. The pirates take some cargo, destroy some equipment, and disappear. There is no logic to their actions. Commander Nexval, his second-in-command, stepped forward. War Prime, perhaps these humans are simply acting without intelligence. Their species has always been known for chaotic behavior. But chaos should be random, Thekvar replied. These attacks are too well coordinated to be truly random, yet too scattered to be strategic. It makes no sense. What Thekvar didn't understand was that making no sense was exactly the point. On Earth, General Lisa Morgan watched the reports from Zephyrian space with satisfaction. Her carefully planned campaign of organized chaos was working exactly as intended. Each attack was designed to look random while serving multiple hidden purposes. The Zephyrians' rigid thinking made it impossible for them to see the bigger picture. How? Are they responding? Asked Admiral Steve Parker during their daily briefing. Exactly as we hoped, Morgan replied. They're treating each attack as a separate incident. They're not connecting them because the connections don't follow any logical pattern that their minds can understand. Dr. Ryan Mitchell entered the room carrying a tablet full of data. The psychological impact is even better than we expected. Our agents are reporting increased anxiety levels among Zephyrian military personnel. They're starting to question their own intelligence reports. Good, Parker said. Phase 2 can begin. The second phase of humanity's war began 3 weeks later. Captain Kelly Murphy led a team of refugees in a coordinated uprising on the industrial world of Kepler-7. But instead of fighting like traditional rebels, they did something the Zephyrians had never seen before. They helped. When Zephyrian security forces arrived to suppress the uprising, they found humans defending Zephyrian civilians from the planet's harsh industrial conditions. The humans had taken over several factories, but instead of destroying them, they were running them more efficiently than before. They had captured government buildings, but were using them to provide better services to both human and Zephyrian residents. Lieutenant Colonel Tony Adams, leading the operation, met with the confused Zephyrian governor under a flag of truce. "We don't understand," the governor said. "You have rebelled against our authority, but you're helping our people. You've seized our facilities, but you're improving them. What do you want?" Tony smiled. "We want to show you that there's a better way to live. Your people are suffering under your rigid system. We're offering them something different." "This is not how rebellions work," the governor protested. "Rebels are supposed to destroy and conquer, not help and improve." "Maybe that's because you've never dealt with humans before," Tony replied. The Kepler-7 situation created a crisis for the Zephyrian Empire. They couldn't simply attack the rebels because the rebels were protecting Zephyrian civilians. They couldn't negotiate because the humans' demands made no sense. They wanted to improve conditions for everyone, not just take control for themselves. Similar uprisings began on other worlds. Each one followed the same pattern. Humans would take control of key facilities, then use them to help both human and Zephyrian populations. Instead of traditional warfare, humanity was offering a different way of organizing society. The psychological impact was devastating. War Prime Thekvar called an emergency meeting of his top commanders. "We are facing an enemy that does not behave like an enemy," he announced. "They attack us, but they also help us. They rebel against our authority, but they improve our worlds. How do we fight such an opponent?" His commanders had no answers. The Zephyrian military doctrine assumed that enemies would act in predictable ways. They would want to destroy, conquer, or control. But humans seemed to want something entirely different. Commander Carol Peterson, now working undercover as a communications officer on Valix Prime, listened to the meeting through hidden monitoring devices. She transmitted the recording back to Earth, where Dr. Helen Brooks analyzed every word. "They're breaking down exactly as we predicted," Brooks reported to Admiral Carter. "The Zephyrians understand order and hierarchy. They can fight enemies who want to replace their system with a similar system. But they can't comprehend enemies who want to replace their system with organized chaos." The final blow came when Captain Sam Turner's deep cover agents began their most subtle operation yet. Instead of attacking or rebelling, they simply started asking questions. "Why do we have to follow exactly the same schedule every day?" A human worker asked her Zephyrian supervisor. "Because that is how things are done," the supervisor replied. "But what if we could do the same work more efficiently with a flexible schedule?" the human continued. "What if we could accomplish more by trying different approaches?" These conversations happened on dozens of worlds, in hundreds of workplaces. Humans didn't argue or rebel. They just asked questions that Zephyrians had never considered before. Questions about why things had to be done the same way every time. Questions about whether rigid order was really the best way to organize society. Some Zephyrians began to wonder if the humans might be right. The empire that had conquered 20 worlds through superior firepower and organization was being defeated by something they had never encountered before. The possibility that their entire way of thinking might be wrong. War Prime Thekvar stood alone in his command center, staring at reports that made less sense each day. His empire was still militarily superior. His fleets still controlled space. His weapons were still more advanced than anything humans possessed. But none of that mattered anymore. His people were starting to think like humans. They were asking questions, trying new approaches, and embracing the very chaos that the Zephyrian Empire had been created to prevent. The war was far from over, but Thekvar was beginning to realize that his side might have already lost. They had been fighting the wrong enemy all along. The real threat wasn't human weapons or human ships. The real threat was human ideas, and ideas, once released, were almost impossible to contain. 9 months after the first pirate attack, Supreme War Prime Vexthul sat in his private chambers on the fortress world of Zephyr Central, trying to understand how his empire was falling apart. Reports covered his desk from across Zephyrian space. Factory workers were suggesting new ways to increase production. Military officers were questioning standard procedures. Entire planets were requesting permission to try human-style governing methods. The worst part was that these new approaches were working. Vexthul activated his communication system and sent a message that would have been unthinkable just months before. He was requesting negotiations with the humans, not as a superior demanding surrender, but as an equal seeking peace. Admiral Lisa Carter received the message at Earth Command headquarters. She read it twice, then called President Frank Martinez immediately. "They want to talk," Carter said. "Supreme War Prime Vexthul is asking for formal peace negotiations." Martinez leaned back in his chair. "After everything they've done, after destroying our colonies without warning, that's exactly why we can't just accept their surrender," Carter replied. "We need to make sure this never happens again. But I have an idea that might work better than simple victory." 2 weeks later, Colonel Mike Torres arrived at Kepler Station, a neutral trading post on the edge of both human and Zephyrian space. He carried humanity's response to the Zephyrian peace request, but it wasn't what anyone expected. Commander Greg Williams provided security for the meeting, while Dr. Anna Scott served as the chief negotiator. They waited in the station's main conference room as Zephyrian ships docked outside. Through the viewing ports, they could see the alien fleet, dozens of massive warships that still looked intimidating despite everything that had happened. Supreme War Prime Vexthul entered the room followed by 6 advisors. The tall, gray-skinned alien moved with the careful precision that had once made his species so feared across the galaxy. But Dr. Scott noticed something different in his large black eyes. Where once there had been absolute confidence, now there was uncertainty. "Humans," Vexthul began in his formal voice. "The Zephyrian Empire requests an end to hostilities. We are prepared to discuss terms for peaceful coexistence." Dr. Scott stood and bowed slightly. "Supreme War Prime, humanity appreciates your willingness to negotiate. However, we cannot accept simple coexistence." Vexthul's advisors shifted nervously. This wasn't what they had expected to hear. "What do you mean?" Vexthul asked. "We mean that humanity requires complete Zephyrian surrender," Scott replied calmly. "But we're offering something that no conqueror in galactic history has ever offered before. We want integration, not destruction." "Integration?" Vexthul repeated the unfamiliar concept. "Your people would become part of human society, not as slaves or subjects, but as equal partners in our expansion across the galaxy. You would keep your culture, your identity, and your pride. But you would also learn our ways of thinking and problem-solving." Colonel Torres stepped forward. "Supreme War Prime, while you've been talking, human forces have been moving into position around your 3 remaining fleet strongholds. We're not negotiating from weakness. We're negotiating from strength." This was true. Captain Kelly Murphy was at that moment leading the final phase of humanity's military campaign. But even these attacks followed the same unpredictable pattern that had confused the Zephyrians for months. At the Rigel stronghold, Murphy used swarm tactics with thousands of small ships that attacked from every direction at once. The Zephyrian defenders, trained to fight large fleet battles, couldn't target so many tiny, fast-moving vessels. The base fell within hours. At the Vega stronghold, Captain Ben Hayes used advanced stealth technology to make his ships appear and disappear randomly around the base. The Zephyrian sensors couldn't track targets that seemed to exist one moment and vanish the next. The defenders spent more time shooting at empty space than at actual enemies. At the Centauri stronghold, Captain Alex Johnson used conventional weapons but deployed them in patterns that violated every known rule of military strategy. His ships attacked from below when logic said they should attack from above. They retreated when they were winning and advanced when they were losing. The Zephyrian commanders couldn't predict what would happen next, and their rigid battle plans became useless. All three strongholds fell on the same day within hours of each other. Supreme War Prime Vexthul received the reports while still sitting at the negotiating table. His last three major military bases were gone, conquered by human forces that fought in ways his generals couldn't understand or counter. "This is impossible," one of his advisors whispered. "Our ships are larger. Our weapons are more powerful. Our shields are stronger. How are they defeating us?" Dr. Scott heard the question and decided to answer it. "Because you're fighting the war you wanted to fight, not the war we brought to you. You prepared for enemies who would try to match your strengths. We decided to avoid your strengths entirely and attack your weaknesses instead." "What weaknesses?" Vexthul demanded. "The Zephyrian Empire has conquered 20 worlds. Our military doctrine is proven and effective." "Your weakness is that you can only think in straight lines," Scott replied. "You assume every problem has one logical solution. You believe every enemy will act rationally according to your definition of rational behavior. But humans don't think that way." Commander Williams added, "Your people are excellent at following orders and maintaining discipline. Those are valuable traits. But they make it impossible for you to adapt when the situation changes unexpectedly." The reports from the three strongholds painted a clear picture. Zephyrian military commanders had abandoned their posts rather than face another incomprehensible human attack. Some had fled to neutral space. Others had simply surrendered to the nearest human forces, asking to be taken prisoner rather than continue fighting an enemy they couldn't understand. War Prime Nexvol, who had once served under Thekvar, sent a personal message to Vexthul during the negotiations. "Supreme War Prime, I formally request permission to surrender my forces to the humans. My officers and I prefer human captivity to continued service in this chaos." Similar messages arrived from commanders across the Empire. The Zephyrian military was collapsing not because of superior human firepower, but because Zephyrian soldiers could no longer function in a universe where the rules kept changing. Vexthul looked at the reports, then at the humans sitting across from him. "What you're offering, this integration, what would it mean for my people?" Dr. Scott smiled. "It would mean learning to think differently. Your people would work alongside humans on joint colonies. You'd participate in human-style democracy, where different ideas are encouraged, not suppressed. You'd learn to see chaos not as something to fear, but as something that creates new possibilities. And if we refuse," Colonel Torres answered honestly, "then your empire will continue to collapse. Your people are already starting to think like humans. You can either guide that change or watch it happen without your leadership." Vexthul was quiet for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "The Zephyrian Empire formally surrenders to humanity. We accept your offer of integration." But the words came too late. Even as he spoke, reports arrived showing that Zephyrian colonies across the Empire were declaring independence and requesting to join human space voluntarily. The empire that had once seemed so powerful was dissolving from within. The humans had won the war not by defeating the Zephyrian Empire, but by convincing the Zephyrians themselves that there was a better way to live. Dr. Scott stood and extended her hand to Vexthul. "Welcome to humanity's version of civilization, Supreme War Prime. We think you're going to like it." As they shook hands, Vexthul realized that the humans had been right about one thing. The age of rigid, predictable empires was ending. The future belonged to those who could adapt, change, and embrace the unexpected. The future belonged to those who could turn chaos into strength. The war ended not with a grand ceremony, but with individual Zephyrian commanders arriving at human space stations asking for asylum. Admiral Steve Parker processed hundreds of requests each day from alien officers who preferred human protection. to the chaos their own empire had become. Captain Jake Sullivan, now commanding the massive integration fleet, watched from his bridge as another group of Zephyrian refugees docked with his flagship. These weren't prisoners or conquered enemies. They were volunteers who had chosen to abandon their old way of life and try something completely different. "Captain, we're receiving another transmission from the Kepler sector," reported his communications officer. "3 more Zephyrian colonies are requesting permission to join human space." Jake nodded. This had been happening for weeks. Entire Zephyrian worlds were voting to leave their empire and become human colonies instead. Not because they were forced to, but because they had seen how human settlements operated and wanted the same freedoms for themselves. President Frank Martinez addressed both species in a joint broadcast from New Geneva on Earth. Behind him stood representatives from dozens of former Zephyrian worlds, all wearing the mixed uniforms that had become the symbol of the new integrated society. "Citizens of Earth and citizens of former Zephyrian space," Martinez began, "today marks the beginning of a new chapter in galactic history. We are no longer separate species competing for territory. We are partners working together to build something better than either of us could create alone." The camera showed crowds gathering on planets throughout human space, but these weren't just human crowds anymore. Tall, gray-skinned Zephyrians stood next to humans, listening to the same speech and cheering at the same moments. Children of both species played together in streets that had once been divided by war. Director Kate Thompson from Strategic Research had spent months studying the integration process. Her reports showed something remarkable happening. Zephyrian colonies that adopted human governing methods became more productive within weeks. Human colonies that learned Zephyrian organizational skills became more efficient. Both species were becoming stronger by working together. "The key is balance," Thompson explained to a gathering of colonial administrators. "Humans bring creativity and adaptability. Zephyrians bring discipline and attention to detail. When you combine those traits, you get societies that are both innovative and stable." Captain Sullivan landed on New Haven, the colony he had been carrying when the war began. The 50,000 human settlers had been joined by 30,000 Zephyrian refugees. Walking through the capital city, Jake could see the results of their cooperation everywhere. The city's layout followed Zephyrian principles of efficient design, but with human modifications that allowed for growth and change. Buildings were arranged in logical patterns, but each one was slightly different, reflecting the creativity of its inhabitants. Transportation systems ran on precise schedules, but with flexibility built in for unexpected needs. Commander Amy Davis, now promoted to Admiral, established the new Integrated Defense Force with its headquarters on New Haven. Her second-in-command was former War Prime Nexvol, who had learned human military doctrine based on adaptability rather than rigid hierarchy. "The hardest part," Amy explained to a group of new officers, "is teaching everyone to think differently about problems. Humans need to learn that structure isn't the enemy of creativity. Zephyrians need to learn that changing plans isn't a sign of failure." The training programs she developed mixed human and Zephyrian personnel at every level. Human officers learned Zephyrian discipline and attention to detail. Zephyrian officers learned human flexibility and creative problem-solving. The result was a military force unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Dr. Ryan Mitchell opened research facilities on former Zephyrian worlds where scientists of both species worked together on new technologies. The combinations were remarkable. Human creativity guided by Zephyrian precision produced advances that neither species had achieved alone. "We're not just sharing knowledge," Mitchell reported to Earth Command. "We're creating entirely new ways of thinking about scientific problems. Human intuition combined with Zephyrian logic is producing solutions we never would have found separately." Ambassador Nicole Foster filed her final report on the integration process. She had traveled to every major world in the former Zephyrian Empire, documenting how the transformation was progressing. "The change is deeper than anyone expected," she wrote. "We didn't just defeat the Zephyrian Empire, we converted it. Their people aren't becoming human, and our people aren't becoming Zephyrian. Both species are becoming something new. On Valix Prime, the former Zephyrian capital, the perfectly organized city of Kelmoran had transformed into something completely different. The rigid geometric patterns remained, but now they were filled with markets, parks, and gathering places where people could meet and share ideas. The massive Hall of Submission had been converted into a library and cultural center. Former Supreme War Prime Vexthal worked there as a historian, documenting the transformation of his own empire. His job was to make sure that future generations understood how the change had happened and why it had been necessary. The humans taught us that strength comes from adaptation, not from control, he wrote in his daily journal. We thought we were conquering the galaxy by imposing our order on chaos. But chaos properly channeled creates possibilities that order alone never could. Captain Tony Adams, now a general, supervised the establishment of new colonies throughout the integrated territories. These settlements followed what had become known as the New Haven model, combining human creativity with Zephyrian efficiency to create communities that were both stable and dynamic. The most remarkable thing about these colonies was how quickly they attracted other species. Word spread throughout the galaxy about the human-Zephyrian integration, and representatives from dozens of other civilizations arrived asking to learn more. The Rigelian Trade Federation sent ambassadors requesting economic partnerships. The Centauri Science Collective wanted to establish joint research programs. Even species that had never shown interest in cooperation were curious about how two such different civilizations had learned to work together. Admiral Lisa Carter received reports from exploration fleets venturing into previously unknown regions of space. They weren't conquering new territories in the old sense. Instead, they were offering the same choice to every species they encountered: join the integrated civilization or remain independent, but experience the benefits of cooperation either way. Many chose to join. The galaxy was changing. The age of rigid empires built on conquest and control was ending. In its place came something unprecedented, a civilization based on voluntary cooperation between species that chose to work together because it made them all stronger. Captain Kelly Murphy, exploring the Outer Rim, sent a message back to Earth that captured the spirit of the new age. We've found 17 new species in the past month, she reported. 12 of them want to establish trade relationships. 5 want to join our colonies. None of them want to fight us. Why would they? She continued. We're not demanding their surrender or trying to impose our will on them. We're showing them that there's a better way to live and then letting them choose for themselves. President Martinez read Murphy's report in his office on Earth. Through his window he could see the construction sites where the new Galactic Integration Council would meet. Representatives from 43 different species would gather there to discuss cooperation, trade, and mutual defense. The humans had won their war against the Zephyrian Empire by refusing to fight the kind of war their enemies expected. They had answered the aliens' demand for peace with overwhelming force. Not the overwhelming force of weapons and destruction, but the overwhelming force of ideas and possibilities. The Zephyrians had begged for peace because they feared human chaos would destroy their ordered civilization. They had been right to fear it. Human chaos had destroyed their rigid empire. But in its place, something better had been born. A galaxy where different species could work together while remaining true to themselves. A civilization built on the strength that comes from diversity rather than uniformity. The transformation was complete, but it was also just beginning. Every day brought new species, new ideas, and new possibilities. The galaxy had learned that chaos properly channeled was not something to fear. It was something to embrace.